Hey Procreators, my name is Kristen April Fry and I'll be your guest host for today's tutorial here on Joel's channel. We're going to be making a quote with a negative space and watercolor blocks. A big thank you to Joel for having me and doing this fun collaboration. If you're new to me and my work, I create lettering designs in the Procreate app. You can find my channel in the description below as well as my socials. So with that, let's get started. We're going to be recreating this piece, but in a different color palette. So from your gallery, let's just tap the plus sign and we're going to create a new canvas. You can use any size for this, but I'm going to use the screen size that's already there built into Procreate. And now from your brush menu, let's go to the watercolor quote set and choose the 6B pencil. You can use any pencil, but I'm going to create a border around my canvas, sort of a bounding box. And I'm just drawing a straight line on each side of the canvas, and then there, it's not working. Try again. There we go. And add a finger and it will snap into a perfectly straight line for you, either horizontal or vertical. And in the layers, let's add a new layer. And at this point, I like to just get an idea for the word placement and the overall composition of the quote. So I just write out the quote so I can see all of the words and sort of which words are going to go together. This is usually where I determine if there are any words or parts of the quote that need to have attention called to them. They might be bigger or smaller depending on the importance of the words. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to break it up into how many lines I want the quote to be in. So I'm deciding I think 4 lines. So I'm going to use the freehand selection tool and the transform and just move those where I created the line. So I'm just drawing around with the freehand and using transform to move it underneath. Just so I can get a good view of how they're going to look stacked on top of each other. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of text. So that's how many blocks I'm going to create. So in a new layer, I'm going to add my lines. And this is where you can get creative and make sort of wavy lines going all in the same direction. You can have also wavy lines going in different directions, and this might work well if you're wanting certain words to be bigger than others. But for this tutorial, we're just going to keep it simple and do some straight lines. So with needing 4 blocks, I'm going to do 1 in the middle and then 1 on either side of that line. Again, drawing a straight line, holding the pencil in place, and then adding a finger. And this looks like it needs to come down a little bit. So I'm going to use the freehand tool to draw around that, go to transform, and then scooch that down just a smidge to kind of get all of the blocks evenly spaced. Now we can combine those into one sketch layer, add a new layer, and now with the same pencil, I'm just going to go in and start really roughly sketching in the words and the placement. And this is where I play with the style of letters as well. The one thing that's important in this step is that you want each letter to touch the top part of that block as well as the bottom part. And here is also where I work out the centering. If some words kind of need better kerning and spacing, this is where you can do that. And I like to play with the cases. So some letters might be lowercase, some might be uppercase. You can certainly have it all upper or all lowers, again, as long as you have the letter touching both the top and the bottom. And I'm just going to speed up the rest of this draft lettering sketch process. All right, so now let's go ahead and merge those together. And in a new layer, we're going to go to the brush menu, choose Nico Roll, and let's find a size that will look good with our words. We don't want one too big. And in the new if you have the Procreate 5X version, they have a feature that you can tap the plus sign and Procreate will remember that size for you. So I'm going to have this at a size 5, and I'm going to go ahead and just trace everything that we have done in our pencil sketch. So if you've ever done watercolor lettering in real life, not digitally, you may have tried using masking tape or gum arabic or something to kind of mask the part that you don't want your paint on. And essentially that's what we're doing with this Inigo roll pen. And it doesn't have to be this pen, it could be, you can do this with any type of a brush. I prefer this one because I like the grungy edges that it has. And when we go ahead and add the color to it, it's going to look like it's running into where we had taped off to give it sort of a more realistic look. And here again, you can just make sure that your letters are touching the tops and bottom. And I even like to kind of overlap a little bit. So in the top part of the letter, I will overlap the line so I don't stop my letter exactly at the line, if that makes sense. So the letter kind of goes into that line a little bit. And after I finish a line or a block, I like to zoom out and just double check, take a look at it, see if I like all the placement, and if it needs to be centered at all, that's where I can do that. And then if everything looks good, just go ahead and start on the next line. Okay, so this one, I can tell that this side has less space than the right side. So again, I'm gonna do what I did earlier with our sketch, and that is just trace around the part I wanna move and scooch it over a little bit until the ends have even spacing. So now there's an area that we moved. So I'm just gonna go and fill in those areas. I'm gonna flip my canvas because it's easier for me to draw towards me. But wherever there's a white line that was caused from our moving it, I just fill that in. And then continue on with the next line. Okay, at this point we can turn off our sketch layer and let's tap our layer and choose a reference. And in a new layer, we are going to choose some colors. I'm going to choose some pinks and maybe some oranges. Select about 3 to 5 colors that you want to use in your palette from the watercolor free palette that's available to you. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose a pink, and then under select, go to automatic and make sure your color fill is off. So it should be white, not blue. And then select some areas that you want to fill. Sometimes you might need to adjust your fill, and you do that by dragging your pencil back and forth on the screen. And go ahead and just select some areas. Make sure they're spaced out. You might even count how many spaces between each color. So if you have 4 colors, you might leave 3 spaces blank in between. You can have a method to it, or just go about it randomly if you like. And for some reason, Procreate, there's a glitch with this update where if you make a mistake and you use a 2-finger tap to undo it, and then when you make a new tap on the canvas, it will undo the last one. So just be aware of that, that's a glitch that hopefully will be fixed in an update. So I'm going to undo it, but now when I tap, that previous one undid. So I have to go back and tap in there as well. And once you have, see how it's undoing previous ones. Once you have all of your blocks selected that you want, as soon as Procreate stops. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's fix the threshold, and there we go. Now go and select your brush and choose the blotchy brush. Make sure the opacity is all the way up. And I'm going to choose, you can choose whatever size you like. I'm going to go somewhere in the middle of there. That's actually too small, so let's bump that up a little bit. That looks good. And just go ahead and fill in those areas that you selected. You can go outside the lines, because when you have the selection done, it won't, it's kind of like a clipping mask or an alpha lock where it won't let you color anything other than what you selected. And after I get everything colored in, I like to go back and add some more color to it. If you mess up, you can undo with a 2-finger tap. And I just go in and add some more saturation. And I'm completely random with this, other than the fact that I like to kind of fill in the areas that aren't, that might have some empty spots. I might fill those in, but other than that, it's just random. When you're done, hit the selection, and we're going to repeat this with every color. So again, go back to the selection, make sure you're on automatic, and select some new areas for your next color. And of course, you can do this all with one color if you like. I just think having a couple colors gives it just a little bit more interest. But if you do want to use just one color, in a step shortly, I will show you how you can add some very slight hue variation to it, just to give it a little bit of something extra. So we're just going to go ahead and repeat that process until all of our blocks are filled with color. And if you like, you can make a new layer for each new color, and that would be considered working non-destructively. So if you changed your mind later and wanted to go in and change those colors, that would be easier to do if it was on its own layer. But in this tutorial, I'm just keeping them all on one layer, just to kind of keep things simple. after you make your selections, you'll notice that you'll have to go and tap the brush library menu to bring your brush back up. Even though you've already selected your brush, it kind of forces you to go in and tap that brush again to be able to use it to fill in those areas. All right, so now we can go into our layers panel and turn off that black layer to leave just the watercolor, and look at how that seeped through. I think that looks so realistic and I absolutely love that, and that's why I use the Nico roll brush for that. Okay, so this step we're going to add the dark edges that comes with real watercolors. So we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to make our reference layer. We're going to select the reference layer. So go to that layer, tap it again, and then choose select. And then from the bottom, we're going to go to the feather option and turn your feather up just a little bit, maybe 2 or 4%, just so you see that blue encroaching in on the watercolors. And choose the color black, go back to your blank layer and choose fill layer. So it's going to look like this, but that's okay, we're not done yet. So in the layers panel, we're going to tap the black layer and choose clipping mask, and that's just going to clip it to the layer beneath it, and then go to the N and choose overlay. And that just adds a slight bit of dark to the edges. If it's not dark enough for you, you can duplicate that layer by sliding it to the left and selecting duplicate, and it just makes it a little bit more noticeable. And if you like the outcome of that, go ahead and just merge those two layers together. Actually, I'm going to merge that with the layer beneath it as well, just to have everything in one layer and nice and neat. Okay, so now our next step is we want to kind of create some color variation in these blocks. So let's go back to our layer and choose the selection, go to freehand, and now we're just going to draw in some really wavy blobs. And the important part in this is just to remember to meet back up with your original starting point. So when you start to draw, it leaves a little gray dot there, and then you can draw a really wavy, curvy line, blob shape, and meet back up with that gray line. And then just pick your pen up and continue making those blobby shapes. Again, this is completely random, no rhyme or reason to this at all, other than making sure there's some form of that shape or blob in every part of each block. Okay, now we're going to go back to that feather option, and we're going to feather it this time to about somewhere between 10 and 15%, depending on how much you want that color variation to change. and then go to your magic wand and choose hue, saturation, and brightness. And this is where you can play with the sliders. You can make it less saturated, more saturated. You can change the brightness to make it more white or darker. I generally don't play with those two sliders. We're going to, in this tutorial, just concentrate on the hue. So here, if you slide it all the way to one direction or the other, it's really overly, it's just kind of hard on the eyes. So I tend to just go no more than 10% in either direction. So no more than 40 or 50%. And this, let's just say we'll go about 42%. That seems to be a good number. And turn that off and turn off your selection. And now if you look, you can see there are some pinks in the oranges, some purples in the pinks, and there's just a slight variation which gives it just a little bit more of a pop. All right, next step is to add the fade that happens in watercolor where it dries lighter. And we could use the eraser, and you could tap the eraser and choose the blotchy brush, but for this we're going to create a mask instead. So to do that, tap the layer and choose mask, and it will automatically go to black, and we're going to stick with the blotchy brush, but we're going to turn the opacity down to about 18 to 20%. And just go in and start coloring over the blocks, and it will look like it's erasing, but it's just masking that. So if you mess up, you can just do a 2-finger tap to undo, but if you want to go back in and add some of that color back, you would change your color palette to white instead of black and just color over it, and it will bring it back. Now let's go in and add some fun splatter to this. And let's go in and create a new layer for that. So in the layers panel, tap the plus sign, and I'm going to choose gray for this, and go to your brush menu. And I've included 3 splatter brushes that are native Procreate brushes, but you can use any type of splatter brush for this. And I'm just playing with the size and going in and tapping in different areas of the canvas. You can use a 2-finger tap to undo. And I'm going to change the brush and choose the second one. Again, playing with the size. And although I'm kind of being random, I'm also being a little bit intentional by making sure there's a splatter in most, if not all, of the areas. And then let's tap the N and go down and move that to divide. And now that leaves a really nice little water splatter mark on there. And it uses the color that's behind it instead of gray, and it clips it to that also. So in a new layer, I'm going to add some more splatter, but this time I'm going to use white. And I'm going to turn that all the way up and see how I like that size. Let's go back down to maybe about 20-ish%. And I like that size a little bit better. And again, I'm just tapping in the white areas that we masked, not directly on the color areas, because I like when the splatter kind of comes in from the edge. And just going around and adding some little splatters here and there. And if the white is too white for you, we can go in and turn down the opacity when we're done. So to do that, just tap the N and move that down a little bit, maybe between 70 or 80%, depending on how bright you want your white to be. All right, so now the last step, we're going to add a new layer and choose black and select the watercolor paper texture from the brush set. And I'm going to move the size down a little bit to about 45%. And then I'm just going to tap in the middle of the canvas. And to make it fit all edges, all sides, go to the transform and choose fit to canvas. And we want that to show through the watercolor. So select the N and go up to multiply. And you can also turn down the opacity if it's just a little bit too dark for you. Um, Now it looks like the watercolor paper texture is showing through the watercolor to make it look a little bit more realistic. I also want to mention that the watercolor paper brush texture is not a native Procreate brush. This is one of my personal brushes that I created and is available in my watercolor lettering free brush set on my website. And I'll link to that below. You can go ahead and call it finished, but I'm going to show you one more bonus step of something I like to do just to bring a little bit more whimsy to this piece, and that is adding some black outlines. All right, so back in the layers menu, let's go and add a new layer for our outlines. And in the brush menu, I'm going to choose the gel pen. Now you can use any type of pen, whether it's monoline or a fine liner, but I'm going to make the thickness of my lines quite thin for this style. And I go in and just trace 2 times around uh, where the letter would be. And I like to do this very loosely. You can even move your hand away from the tip of the Apple Pencil to give yourself less control. This is just a style choice. You can be more uniform and neat with this, but I prefer in this style the more organic, loose, messy look, just to give it something a little bit extra. Now with this pen in particular, the gel pen, I like to bounce around with this. The first time I started using it, I realized the thickness of the pen tends to get lesser and less thick as you start to use it. And then the beginning of your piece will look a lot more bold than the end of your piece. So to avoid that, I bounce around a little bit. That way the thickness of the lines aren't centralized to one area of the design. So, I mean, if you want to avoid that, here's an example of what it looks like. You could see the beginning of the piece was much more bold than the end of the piece. So you could use a different pen altogether if you like, but I just really liked the feel of the gel pen, so I just worked around that issue. So I'm going to speed this up just to get through this, but again, just go around and loosely tracing each letter, and if you do it 2 to 3 times, it just adds just an extra little something to it to give it more of a fun and careless look. Okay, and one more optional step is I'm going to increase the size of my brush a little bit and add some black splatter to this to tie in the black outline with the rest of the design so it looks more cohesive. And instead of using a splatter brush, I'm just doing this manually by adding little dot clusters here and there, and I'm keeping them outside of the outlined letters. I want to keep the white part white in my design, so I'm adding the black dots to the watercolor blocks. Okay, so thank you so much for following along, and thank you again to Joel for having me. And if you've gone and made your own version of this, please share with us on social media. I'd love to see the outcome, and happy hand lettering.